The sky is trying to kill him. Richard Bong yanks the stick hard left and the P-38 Lightning screams into a spiral that would black out most men in seconds. His vision narrows to a tunnel. Gray at the edges, then nothing. He forces a breath. The gray recedes. The horizon snaps back into view, and there they are. 11 Zeros, not 6, not 8. The 11 Imperial Japanese Navy. A6M Zero fighters, the most feared dogfighting aircraft in the Pacific sky, arranging themselves around a single American plane like wolves circling a wounded elk. They had him boxed from 3 angles. High cover above, strike element closing from the left, a trailing pair cutting off any retreat to the south. The date is December 1943. The place, the skies above Dobodura, New Guinea, a nightmare theater of jungle warfare, malaria, and aerial killing where American pilots had been dying at rates the War Department refused to print in newspapers. The temperature at altitude is minus 30 degrees. Bong's oxygen mask has been fogging for the last 4 minutes. He is flying at 25,000 feet and he is completely, absolutely, terrifyingly alone. His wingman had taken a cannon round to the engine block 7 minutes ago and peeled off trailing smoke. His radio was a wall of static. The Japanese were jamming frequencies across the sector. There was no cavalry coming, no rescue signal reaching any friendly station. Here is what the Japanese pilots knew. A lone American P-38 separated from his formation was a kill that practically made itself. Here is what they did not know. The man inside that cockpit had already sent 21 enemy aircraft to the bottom of the jungle below. They did not know his name, and they did not know that the picture of a Wisconsin girl taped to his instrument panel had become something like a talisman against death itself. They would learn both things in the next 8 minutes. What one American pilot did next in that freezing sky above New Guinea, alone against 11 of Japan's deadliest fighter pilots, would leave interrogators, historians, and the Japanese Imperial Navy's own after-action analysis team struggling for a rational explanation, and they never fully found one. Richard Ira Bong was 23 years old, and he still looked like he should be baling hay on his father's farm. He grew up in Poplar, Wisconsin, a small town of dirt roads and timber country in the far northwestern corner of the state, the kind of place where the winters lasted 6 months and boys learned early that patience and stubbornness were not weaknesses but survival strategies. His father, Gust Bong, was a Swedish immigrant who'd built a farm from nothing. His mother, Dora, raised 9 children in a house that was never quite warm enough and never quite large enough, and where love was demonstrated not through words but through presence, through showing up, through staying. Dick Bong, nobody called him Richard, was the eldest son. He was a compact, broad-shouldered young man with sandy hair, a face that creased easily into a grin, and pale eyes that gave away almost nothing of what was happening behind them. Teachers described him as quiet. Classmates described him as steady. His younger brothers simply knew him as the one who never panicked. The one who, when the tractor broke down in the middle of a field in a rainstorm, sat down, looked at the problem from every angle, and fixed it. He discovered flight in the way that farm boys in the 1930s often did, through sheer accident of geography. A barnstormer landed in a field near Poplar when Dick was a teenager, and the man offered rides for $2. Bong didn't have $2. He watched from the fence. He watched the plane bank and turn over the tree line, and something in him rearranged itself permanently. He was working toward a pilot's license by the time he enrolled at Superior State Teachers College, and he joined the civilian pilot training program before anyone had decided what to do with Hitler, even when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Dick Bong had already put in 250 hours of flight time. He walked into the U.S. Army Air Force's recruiting office the following week. The detail that would matter later, the small, particular human thing that would anchor him to life in moments when life became negotiable, was a photograph. Marge Van Valkenburg. She was from Superior, Wisconsin. She had brown hair and a smile that looked like it belonged to someone who had never been afraid of anything. Dick had met her at a church dance. He wasn't particularly smooth. He was, in fact, terrible at conversation that didn't involve aircraft or farm machinery. But Marge didn't seem to require much performance from him, and that was the rarest thing he had ever encountered. Before he shipped out, he had her photograph printed at a drugstore on Superior Avenue. He taped it to the instrument panel of whatever plane he was flying. When his ground crew painted the nose of his P-38 with her image and the name Marge in yellow letters, Bong didn't protest. He didn't explain it to anyone either. Some things you don't explain. When they shipped him to the 5th Air Force's base at Dobodura, New Guinea in 1942, Dick Bong left behind a Wisconsin winter, a family farm, and a woman whose photograph he would look at every single time he thought he was about to die. In the Pacific, those moments came often, and they were about to come like they never had before. By December 1943, the air war over New Guinea had turned savage in ways that official military communiques struggled to capture. The 5th Air Force, under General George Kenny, was fighting a two-front war. Against the Japanese and against the geography. New Guinea was 1,500 miles of jungled mountain and malarial swamp, riddled with weather systems that could swallow entire formations in minutes. Pilots who survived enemy contact still had to survive the terrain. Men who made it through both were not common. The strategic objective that week was aggressive. A fighter sweep over Finschhafen to suppress Japanese air activity and clear the skies ahead of a planned Allied naval movement along the northern coast. Bong's unit, the 49th Fighter Group, a 9th Fighter Squadron flying P-38 Lightnings, was assigned high cover. Their job was to keep the sky clean above the strike aircraft, intercept any Japanese response, and return to base intact. The four pillars of what went wrong assembled themselves with the impersonal efficiency of disaster. First, the formation. The early morning sortie departed on schedule, but a cascading sequence of navigational errors brought on by solid, overcast cloud cover and malfunctioning compasses began pulling the squadron apart. By the time the cloud broke at 22,000 feet over the Huon Gulf, Bong's element was 3 miles off its plotted course and drifting farther by the minute. Second, communications. Japanese jamming equipment, increasingly sophisticated by late 1943, had rendered the primary radio frequency unusable. The backup frequency was partially operational, new but fragmented. Bong could hear voices but not make out words. He could transmit but had no way of knowing whether anyone received him. He was flying in a box of sound and silence that amounted to the same thing as flying deaf. Third, fuel and ammunition. The extended navigation had burned through the fuel margins his flight plan assumed. Yet his ammunition was full. He'd fired a short test burst at departure and had seen no sign of enemy contact yet. But his fuel state was becoming a problem that had its own quiet countdown. He had perhaps 70 minutes of flying time remaining when the cloud broke. Every minute of combat would eat into that margin like acid. Fourth, his wingman. Lieutenant Carl Garrett took a burst of 20mm cannon fire from a Zero that materialized from a cloud bank at 11 o'clock. Unseen, unannounced, and instantly lethal. Garrett's left engine seized and began smoking. He was not dead, he was not wounded, but he was flying a crippled aircraft 40 miles from base with a fire risk that gave him no choice. He peeled off with a hand signal, and the radio was useless, and disappeared into the cloud. And just like that, Richard Bong was alone. He did not panic. He never panicked. He scanned the sky in the practiced grid pattern that 5th Air Force instructors drilled until it became reflex. High right, high left, level right, level left, low quarter. And that was when he counted them. 11 zeros, 3 distinct formations, converging. The Japanese pilots had spotted the lone twin-boom silhouette against the blue, and they were maneuvering with the calm professionalism of men who had done this before. The A6M Zero was, in terms of raw turning performance, arguably the most maneuverable carrier fighter in the world. At low and medium speed, it could outturn anything the Americans flew. The Japanese pilots knew it. They had been flying circles around Allied fighters since 1941. What they were about to discover is that Richard Bong did not intend to turn with them. They come in fast from the high right sector, 2 zeros in a diving attack, their red Hinamaru markings crisp against the clear sky, their 7.7mm wing guns already beginning to wink. Bong sees them the instant they commit. He doesn't run. He doesn't break away. He does something that no rational pilot in his position should do. He points the nose of Marge directly at them and pushes the throttle to the firewall. The 2 P-38 engines, twin Allison V-1710s, 1,475 horsepower each, respond with a sound like tearing metal. The airspeed indicator climbs past 350 miles per hour, past 380, past 400. And the Zero pilots see the American aircraft accelerating directly into their attack, and they do something they didn't plan on doing. They flinch. They break right and left to avoid the head-on collision that suddenly looks very real. Bong tracks the one that breaks left. The angle is tight, a deflection shot at crossing geometry, and he fires. A 2-second burst from the P-38's nose armament. 1 20mm cannon and 4.50 caliber M2 Brownings, all firing at once through the aircraft's nose in a convergence of fire that puts 750 rounds per minute into whatever it's pointed at. The Zero flies through the burst. 01 comes apart from the engine nacelle forward. No drama, no spin. The aircraft simply ceases to be an aircraft and becomes a descending collection of aluminum and fire. The Japanese pilot is gone before he understands what happened. 8 seconds have elapsed since first contact. Now the sky belongs to chaos, and the remaining 10 zeros react like a living organism. The high cover element rolls in from above. The strike element accelerates. The trailing pair cuts off the southern escape corridor. They are disciplined, professional, and they are angry. A lone American has just killed one of their own in the opening seconds of what was supposed to be a routine interception. Bong does not stop moving. He never stops moving. The P-38 is not a Zero. It cannot outturn one in a low-speed, level flight dogfight. But it has things the Zero does not: armor plating behind the pilot's head, self-sealing fuel tanks, and, critically, a sustained dive speed that the Zero physically cannot match without shedding its wings. Bong knows all of this. He built his entire combat philosophy around it. He has a decision to make in the next 4 seconds. He can attempt to disengage. dive away, use his speed advantage to create distance, and hope to find a friendly formation before the Zeros regroup. That is the rational choice. That is what the operations manual would recommend. What he chooses instead makes no sense. Not yet. He pulls up. He points Marge at the sky and climbs directly into the center of the remaining 10 Zeros. Every Zero pilot in that engagement would later describe the same impossible moment. The lone American, instead of running, flew toward them. An interrogating intelligence officer asked one survivor to explain it. The survivor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "We did not understand what he was doing. We still do not understand." He climbs at full military power, the P-38's twin supercharged engines dragging him skyward at 2,600 feet per minute. The Zeros follow. This is their mistake, and they don't know it yet. The A6M Zero was built light, featherweight construction, no armor, minimal fuel capacity. At high altitude above 25,000 feet, its performance degraded. At 28,000 feet, a Zero had roughly 80% of its low-altitude agility. The P-38 had closer to 95%. Bong knows this the way a surgeon knows the width of an artery. The first Zero to close within range takes a quarter-second burst at 70 degrees deflection. A nearly impossible shot angle, and the burst clips its engine. Zero 2 falls away smoking, probably not dead, but certainly out of the fight. He's spiraling toward the jungle below with a seized cylinder and a terrified pilot. Bong doesn't watch it go. He's already pivoting. 3 Zeros are now above him, stacked. They begin diving in sequence, a coordinated rope-a-dope designed to force him into a slow-speed turning engagement where the Zero's superior maneuverability will kill him. The first one dives. Bong breaks into it, forcing an overshoot. Second Zero dives immediately. Bong reverses. His vision grays at the edges as the G-forces slam him into his seat. 3 rounds left in his main cannon. He's been firing in controlled bursts, rationing, but the fight is eating ammunition faster than he planned. The second Zero overshoots by less than 20 feet, close enough that Bong can see the pilot's head turn to track him as he passes. The Japanese pilot is good. He knows he just missed something he won't get back. Third Zero comes in from the right quarter, a crossing shot. Bong fires. 7 rounds from the 20mm, a long burst from the 50s. Zero 3 takes the burst through the cockpit and disintegrates. Bong's hands are shaking. He presses them flat against the throttle quadrant for half a second to make them stop. 8 Zeros remaining. His fuel state is dropping below comfortable. He's been in the engagement for 90 seconds and he's running out of margin in every direction. He takes a cannon round, 120mm shell from a Zero that appears from his 7 o'clock, a position he wasn't watching. The round punches through the right tail boom and detonates. The P-38 shudders violently. An alarm light on the panel ignites. Right engine coolant pressure. The Allison is running hot. He checks the temperature gauge, climbing. He has maybe 10 minutes on that engine before it seizes. Now, and this is the moment that will confuse the debriefers, he does something that looks from the outside like surrender. He reduces throttle on the damaged right engine and begins descending. To every Zero pilot watching, the American is finally running. Finally doing what any sensible pilot in his position would do. Disengaging, using the P-38's dive speed to escape south toward friendly territory. 3 of the 8 remaining Zeros follow him down. The others hold altitude, turning lazy orbits, waiting for the American to reappear. They wait for a long time. At 18,000 feet descending, Bong's oxygen mask partially unseals from the right side. Cold, thin air hits his face like a knife. He can feel his thinking begin to slow. Hypoxia at altitude is subtle and absolutely lethal. He reaches up, presses the mask back, holds it with his left hand for 15 seconds until the seal holds. His right hand is flying the airplane alone. The P-38 is sliding left. You're beginning to wallow. A Zero closes to within 300 feet from behind. The Japanese pilot has a perfect shot. He doesn't take it. Later analysis would suggest the Zero pilot didn't believe his instruments. The distance looked too easy. He pushed for 200 feet, then 150. Bong felt the shadow before he saw it. He stands the P-38 on its left wingtip in a brake turn so violent that the airframe moans and the horizon disappears. The Zero, committed to a narrow angle of attack, cannot follow. It overshoots. Bong rolls inverted, pulls through, and comes out 200 feet behind the Japanese aircraft. He fires. 04 falls. 6 zeros left. Bong's right engine temperature is in the red. His cannon ammunition is nearly exhausted. He has, he estimates, 4 minutes of useful fight remaining before the engine either seizes or he has to nurse it home. And then he does the irrational thing. The thing that will end up in debrief reports stamped with confused question marks. And instead of disengaging south, which he could do right now with his speed advantage, with the altitude he'd spent the last 3 minutes carefully accumulating, he turns north, back into the remaining 6 zeros, back toward Dobodura, which lies beyond them. The P-38 Marge points its twin booms back into the fight. 6 Japanese fighter pilots watch a single engine-damaged American aircraft turn and charge them. They have no precedent for this, and in the 3 seconds between turning north and the next engagement, Richard Bong is alone inside his own head in a way that combat never quite allows but sometimes forces. His hands move automatically, throttle, trim, gun sight, because 23 months of training have made the hands into something separate from the mind. The hands know what to do. It's the rest of him that has stopped. He is tired. Not the tired of a long day or a hard week, that tired you can reason your way through. He is tired in the bone marrow, the way the Pacific Theater ground men down eventually, through accumulated missions flown in extreme cold and extreme heat, through the sustained cortisol of knowing that every morning you walk to your aircraft might be the last morning. The right engine is complaining. The cockpit smells like burnt hydraulic fluid and something metallic he doesn't want to identify. His oxygen mask is still partially unsealed and the cold is working through the left side of his face with the methodical patience of an entity that has all the time in the world. He thinks about Poplar, Wisconsin. He doesn't mean to. It simply arrives. He sees the farm in winter. The way the snow sat on the fence lines in specific heavy shapes that he could probably draw from memory even now. And he hears his mother's voice in a register of sound that has nothing to do with the roar of twin Allisons at military power. He sees 9 kids in a house that was never quite warm enough, and he feels with sudden irrational certainty that he is the only one who will know what this moment looked like from the inside. That's when the doubt finds him. Not a dramatic crisis of faith, not a hero's moment of existential reckoning. Something smaller and therefore worse, a simple, a quiet question that arrives in the gap between heartbeats. What is the point of this? What does surviving mean if the engine seizes over the jungle and the rescue never comes and nobody in Poplar, Wisconsin ever knows the name of the mountain you went down on? He doesn't answer the question. He lets it exist in the cockpit with him for 2 full seconds, which is a long time when zeros are closing. And then he looks at the instrument panel. Marge's photograph is taped there, slightly crooked, through the edges curling from the humidity and cold cycles. She isn't smiling in the photograph. It's the kind of candid shot where she's looking slightly past the camera, at something the photographer couldn't see. She looks like someone who has all the time in the world. Like someone who is waiting completely without anxiety because she has already decided the waiting will end correctly. Dick Bong had made a promise, not out loud, not in a letter, and the kind you make to yourself when you tape a photograph to an instrument panel and you don't explain it to anyone. The kind that lives below words. He blinks. His hands are already flying the airplane north. 6 zeros. Damaged engine. 4 minutes before the right Allison either seizes or he calls it. He fires. The left engine is at full military power. The right is throttled back to 50%, running hot, running rough, but still running. This is the reason he turned north, and this is the irrational thing that was never irrational at all. He is flying a one-engine P-38, asymmetric thrust pulling the nose left, but he is doing it deliberately. The slight left drift changes his angle of approach to the zero formation by 8 degrees. 8 degrees that puts the lead zero in a crossing geometry where Bong's gun convergence is perfect and the Japanese pilot's deflection calculation is 0.3 of a second behind reality. He fires into the formation, not at one aircraft, into it. A sustained burst from the 4 M2 Brownings that sweeps across the nose of the lead zero like a scythe. 05 takes the burst through both wings and begins to come apart. The formation breaks. They scatter. Bong had expected this. He had been counting on it. A broken formation is 6 individual aircraft making individual decisions instead of one coordinated organism making a coordinated decision. Individual decisions can be read. Coordinated decisions are harder to survive. He fires, reloads the Browning's charging handles mentally. He has 200 rounds left, maybe less. He fires again, tracks the nearest zero in a tight climbing turn, anticipates the exit 0.3 aircraft lengths ahead and places his burst there. 06 flies through it. The pilot never knew the American could predict where he was going. 4 left, and the 2 trailing zeros, the pair that cut off his southern escape at the start of the engagement, are coming in fast from low right. He rolls inverted and dives through them, firing upward as he passes beneath. 1 burst, 1 zero. 07 loses its entire right wing route and enters a flat spin it will not recover from. 3 remaining zeros break hard. They are no longer attacking. They are surviving. Bong climbs back to 22,000 feet on the left engine alone. In the right now throttled to 20% and running only to maintain directional control. He is running on fumes in every direction that matters. He has perhaps 60 seconds of effective fight remaining. He finds the nearest zero, a lone aircraft in a climbing turn to the north, its pilot trying to regain altitude. And he attacks it from directly below. The zero pilot never sees him. The burst from below takes the aircraft through the belly fuel tank. 08 becomes fire. U2 zeros left. They are running south. They are done. Bong watches them go. He does not chase them. He levels the wings, reduces power on the remaining left engine to cruise, and begins the long, careful, delicate flight back to Dobodura on one engine with ammunition he can count on both hands, and a fuel state that should mathematically get him home with 8 minutes to spare. The sky above New Guinea is empty and blue. And the last radio transmission Dobodura Tower received from the engagement zone was his voice, flat and unhurried. Delta 1 returning to base. Single engine. 8 confirmed, 2 disengaged. The tower operator later said he thought for a moment the pilot was describing a poker game. When Marge landed at Dobadura, right engine seized completely on short final, of the aircraft settling onto the runway on one engine in sheer momentum. The ground crew chief watched the P-38 roll to a stop and stood without speaking for almost 10 seconds. The aircraft's right tail boom had a cannon shell hole you could put your fist through. The right engine cowling was blistered from thermal stress. 11 separate bullet holes stitched across the right wing's trailing edge. The windscreen had a crack running diagonally through the lower right quarter that had somehow held structural integrity for the entire flight home. Chief Sergeant Walter Huff, who had been maintaining Bong's aircraft since the squadron's arrival in New Guinea, later told a war correspondent, "I've seen men walk out of bad airplanes before. This was different. The airplane wasn't supposed to fly back. Enid just didn't know that yet." The intelligence section's after-action assessment was straightforward. 8 confirmed aerial victories in a single engagement, with 2 additional Zeros observed to disengage and retreat south, likely with damage. The time from first contact to Bong's last confirmed kill, 8 minutes and 40 seconds. The wreckage of downed aircraft, scattered across 12 miles of jungle terrain, would be catalogued by ground parties over the following days. And the enemy perspective emerged in fragments through post-war interrogations of surviving Japanese pilots from the Rabaul area air groups operating in the sector that day. A Japanese flight lieutenant interviewed by MacArthur's intelligence staff in 1945 described the engagement from the Japanese side. He had been one of the trailing pair. He had watched the lone P-38, damaged, turn back north into the surviving formation when logic and self-preservation demanded it run south. We did not have a word for what this pilot was doing, his statement read, in translation. In our training, in our doctrine, there is no situation described where a single damaged aircraft, alone without support, turns toward 11 opponents. We believed he had perhaps lost consciousness. Perhaps his controls had failed. It was not until later, when it was over, that we understood he had chosen this deliberately. We called him Nagata no Teki, the enemy who does not stop, and we had no better description. The phrase didn't translate cleanly from Japanese to English. The closest approximation intelligence analysts settled on was the enemy who doesn't know he's supposed to stop. General George Kenny, commanding the 5th Air Force, reviewed the after-action report and wrote in the margin, "This is the kind of thing that wins a war." On December 8, 1944, General Douglas MacArthur personally awarded Richard Ira Bong the Medal of Honor in a ceremony at Leyte, in the Philippines. Bong had by that point compiled a final total of 40 confirmed aerial victories, the highest in American history, a record that has never been broken. The Medal of Honor citation read in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action above and beyond the call of duty in the Southwest Pacific area, from October 10th to November 15th, 1944. Though assigned to a non-combat duty during this period, Major, Bong voluntarily and at his own urgent request engaged in repeated combat missions, including unusually hazardous sorties over Ormoc Bay and the Leyte area of the Philippines. His aggressiveness and daring resulted in his shooting down 8 enemy airplanes during this period. The official language of the United States military, in this case, understates the matter almost comically. What it does not say, and what the men who flew alongside him understood, was that the number 40 represented not just skill, but a kind of covenant between a man and his own limits that most people are never required to make. When Kenny finally grounded Bong and sent him home to America, the general made him promise not to fly combat again. Bong agreed. He returned to Superior, Wisconsin. He married Marge Van Valkenburg on February 10th, 1945, at a ceremony that drew the entire town and most of the surrounding county. The photograph came off the instrument panel and became, in a way, a different kind of artifact. No longer a talisman against death, but simply a picture of a woman who had waited. He was 24 years old. Richard Bong died on August 6, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, while test flying a P-80 Shooting Star jet fighter at Lockheed's facility in California. An engine failure, and a parachute that didn't deploy in time. The war had ended for everyone else. It found him anyway. He is buried in Poplar, Wisconsin. His hometown named an airport after him. His P-38, or what the 5th Air Force could reconstruct of its history, became part of the Smithsonian's collection. Marge lived until 2003. She never remarried. There is something specific that happens when you run out of explanations. Not running out of courage. Courage is a decision you can make in advance. It's in the daylight, when the stakes are hypothetical and the mathematics feel manageable. Running out of explanations is different. It is the moment when everything that made sense 10 minutes ago has stopped making sense, when the aircraft is damaged and the engine is hot and 10 opponents are alive and one of them has your angle and none of this is going the way anything was supposed to go. In that moment, specifically that one, what you do is who you are. Not what your training says, not what doctrine recommends, not what the rational calculation produces. Who you are, stripped of everything that isn't essential, is what gets decided in those seconds. Veterans watching this understand something civilians can't quite put words to. The weight of being the one still standing. The particular silence inside a cockpit when the radio is dead and every decision is yours alone and the cost of a wrong one isn't abstract. And you know what it is to flatten your hands against a surface and wait for them to stop shaking. You know what it is to look at a photograph on a panel not for comfort exactly, but for location. To remember where you are in relation to the things that matter so you can aim toward them. For civilians, here is what Richard Bong's story is actually about. It is not about war. It is about the 8 degrees. The small, specific, counterintuitive thing that looked like madness from outside but was the sharpest thinking available. We all face our version of the moment where the correct-looking choice and the right choice diverge, where retreating south feels safe and turning north feels insane, but you know which one gets you home. Dick Bong turned north, not because he wasn't afraid, not because he was superhuman, because there was a photograph on an instrument panel, and a woman who looked like she had already decided the waiting would end correctly, and a promise of the kind that doesn't require words. He flew Marge home on one engine. The other one had already given everything it had. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss these forgotten stories of extraordinary American courage. And drop a name in the comments. Whose story should we tell next?